Well, hello there, everyone. Happy January, Happy New Year, or maybe just New Year. We'll see how happy it is. Welcome to 2021. Welcome back to Rowan University, and welcome to Comparative Political Systems. My name is Dr. Michael Rossi, and I'm absolutely delighted to be teaching back at Rowan, if only for one class, and if only for an online version of said class. But I've had the pleasure of speaking with a few of you already in the past few days and weeks. I think I emailed you at least once, and at the time of this recording, the Canvas page is all ready to go. I'm just simply waiting for the green light from administration where I can publish it, and I've decided that I'm going to be doing a couple of pre-recorded lectures to get started. So if you're accessing this lecture, and that means that you're already on the Canvas page before the semester formally begins, well, you've got an opportunity to get a head start. And, I really hope that you find this class enjoyable and informative. It is a class that I have been teaching now for almost 20 years in some capacity. I started out as a teaching assistant back in 2000, actually, really 2001, teaching this class. And some of the material that is used here is basically 20 years old, not in terms of, publication date, but just stuff that I have used off and on up until then. So I'm really delighted to be offering this class to all of you. And as I said, I hope that you enjoy it. I hope that you find it informative. And I hope that by May, we all walk away thinking that this online experience was rewarding as well as enriching. And so, before we begin, I guess a little bit about me, because I am not officially associated anymore with Rowan. I am currently working in the Department of Political Science at Long Island University, Brooklyn, where I am also the director of the International Relations Program. And I got this position about a year and a half ago, back in September of 2019. And prior to that, I sort of was stationed for the most part out of Rutgers University. In fact, when I had my visiting instructor position at Rowan from 2013 to 14, I was still officially attached to Rutgers, where I worked everything from grad student to adjunct instructor to university instructor. And it is really at Rutgers that I developed many of these courses within comparative politics and international relations. I also teach courses on democratic transition theory. My area of interest is primarily Eastern Europe, particularly Central and Southeastern Europe, the Balkans, the former Soviet Union, where I teach courses on post-communist studies, Russian foreign policy, political culture, and statecraft in the Balkans. I also offer a course on globalization, which is actually one of my real all-time favorites, and political culture. So I'm kind of a jack of all trades within the comparative and IR subfields. And when I was at Rowan back in 2013, 2014, I offered many of these classes, definitely comparative and international relations. I offered a small seminar on European politics. And I did, I think it's one of those, I forget the name of this course, Contemporary World Problem. You all have to take this one class. It's kind of like one of those all-encompassing humanities courses. And I just sort of offered a glorified version of my globalization class. But Dr. Markowitz had contacted me back in late October, early November, asking if I would be interested in teaching two sections of comparative political systems, which is what we at Rutgers call comparative politics. I happily jumped on that, knowing that I've had a long and fruitful relationship with Dr. Markowitz. And when I was told that the class would be online, that was even better, seeing as how I'm teaching and working out of Brooklyn, and you can kind of Google map and figure out how separated Brooklyn is from Glassboro. I remember the drive down because I'm hailing from the New Brunswick area, and that trip down the turnpike back in 13, 14. This is before the car and truck extension was completed. So I got a little white knuckle dicey by around exit 4 there. But in addition to that, I also have my own YouTube page, little glorified, shameless plug here, where a number of these lectures are already based. If you can already see, I've got a playlist for Intro to Comparative Politics. This is just sort of a side project of mine where for the past number of years I have recorded lectures that I've done actually within classrooms. Many of them were done at Rutgers. And more recently, courses online like this are already recorded, and I just simply upload them to my YouTube page. And if you're interested, you can check me out at Michael Rossi Poli-Sci. Apparently, I'm popular. I've got over 5,000 subscribers. And if you can kind of look at some of the popular uploads here, some of these videos have been viewed, in the tens of thousands of times. So I'm doing something right, I guess, perhaps, I don't know. But, with all of that said, there actually is an existing playlist within the comparative politics field here. And while I was initially tempted to just simply recycle these YouTube videos for you, I realized that some of them might be a little outdated, and I wanted to give you some more up-to-date current information for the end of 2020, beginning of 2021. And you'll also notice that what's missing in this playlist are the lectures on these specific countries. So rest assured, I'm going to be recording all the lectures for both sections, and they will be dedicated specifically for Rowan University. Now, I haven't decided whether I'm going to upload them to my YouTube page or I'll just upload them, to Canvas. But either way, this is part of the entire online experience here. And I don't know how many of you have taken a complete online class before. I've learned over the years that quote-unquote online learning is somewhat of a loaded statement, because when we think of online, we understand that there is absolutely no direct interaction between the instructor and the student. That will not be the case for us. The class will be, I guess the better term is conducted remotely, seeing as how we won't be meeting physically within a classroom. I've done online, remote, however way you want to, call it now, for about 15 or so years. I'm comfortable doing online classes, although I'm going to be perfectly honest with you, I'm not a fan of them. I still believe that the good old-fashioned classroom experience is best. But increasingly, I've come to realize that newer generations of students are definitely digital generation. Many of you probably came from digitally advanced high schools where you were given tablets and emails, and the teachers were much more tech savvy than you would find at college. And, the big paradox is that many of you will graduate from high school that, has a well-endowed digital learning component, only to go to a college or a university where you technologically revert back to 1993. And yes, I have worked with a number of faculty at every college and university around that, still feels that, they save their things to floppy disks. So, I'm not a fan of online learning, but I realize that this is where we are in the future. And I'm not ready to say that it is, the death knell of academia, but, if you really want to get my opinion here, academia has been kind of under structural assault for years, ranging from everything from, the university chancellor to Betsy DeVos. So, we are, people who learn by multimedia today, and so that's why I feel that offering at least a good chunk of this class online gives you some kind of freedom and flexibility from being tethered to a specific schedule. So this class does have 2 sections. But I have unified the 2 of them in one Canvas page. So that means that you will be interacting with both sections, and as of last count, We are well over 50 students, but you'll be interacting with each other through threaded discussions. Now, the scheduled Zoom meetings are still going to reflect the course scheduling. So Section 1 is scheduled to meet from 11 to 12:15 every Tuesday and Thursday, and Section 2 from 12:30 to 1:45. I haven't yet decided whether we need to meet both times during the week, considering that all of the lectures are going to be asynchronously delivered to you, and they will be available by, at the absolute latest, the beginning of that reading week. So what that means is we will effectively use the time that is scheduled to us, not for me to lecture, but for discussion and participation. So, the online component almost invariably turns an otherwise introductory class into a seminar. Now, before you get scared and run away and think that it's going to be more difficult, I think that there is some advantage to this. Many of you have no doubt experienced that environment where the professor is giving a lecture and has, a PowerPoint up at the, on the screen, and you're, furiously writing everything down while the professor is also talking. And so you're trying to figure out, well, what do I write down? Do I write down the stuff on the screen at the expense of listening to what he or she is saying, or vice versa? What we have now is that these lectures are readily available, and you can listen to them whenever and however many times that you want. In addition, you can listen to them at your own pace. So, 20 minutes and then take a break, come back, pick it up, right? Do a little bit more, do a little bit there, right? And, in that case, you're able to go at your own speed. I just simply ask that you work at your own pace within the week. One other thing that I'm very happy to say is that you don't have to purchase any books for this class. All readings are provided by me, and they are available on Canvas. And that includes the textbook, which the syllabus gives you a link to the publisher if you want to purchase or rent the textbook. That is perfectly fine. But I'm sure many of you know that there are, and this is, we'll keep this between us, right? There's a number of websites out there where you can find accidentally, PDF versions of the book. And, in this day and age, I'm really not a big fan of forcing students to spend inordinate amounts of money for books that they're only going to use once a semester. So if I can find them on PDF, and this is especially true when I assign chapters or articles in scholarly journals, I feel let's pass the savings on to you. And not only that, but, if you want to print out the readings, that's totally fine. If you want to read them from your tablet or however, whatever makes you feel the most comfortable, the only thing that I just simply ask in return is that you just read what is, assigned. The only time that we will be working, therefore, together as a group, outside of our designated sections, will be in the threaded discussions. And I enumerated this within the syllabus in this being a way for you to maintain class participation, which is 20% of your grade. Now, knowing full well that even if I have 2 separate section Zoom meetings every week, there is no way that everyone is going to be able to talk. And there's probably a few of you that don't really talk in class at all. Doesn't mean that you don't know anything. Doesn't mean that you're somehow ignorant of the material. It's just that you're not a talkative person. So I'm pretty certain at this point you all have had classes where there are discussion threads that allow you to engage the material without actually having to physically speak up. These threaded discussions run the range from open-ended forums of writing whatever you want to a series of questions that you can pick 1 or 2 from. And I think that by the second half of class, I even have combined the study questions and the discussion questions. The study questions are not meant for you to physically complete, but if you're able to answer them, you're well on your way to knowing the material for exam time. I think by the second half of class, when we get to the non-democracies, I've just kind of put the two of them together, and you can kind of double up and get participation points. Your goal, as I mentioned in the syllabus, is to accumulate 20 participation points by the end of the semester. So it is a rolling, accumulating, growing percentage, right? So let's just say that, the first 3 weeks you participate in every forum and every online discussion and every Zoom class, and you end up getting 5 points. It's not that you're failing, it's just that you've had 5 opportunities to participate and you've done it 5 times. So my guess is that by mid to late April, you should be very close or at 20, right? So that's one of the big things that you have alongside a midterm and a final and a take-home paper, right? This is an introductory class, or at least it's designed to be an introductory class, so there's no major research assignment, there's no library research that you have to do. All of your assignments, all of your writings should just simply use in-house material. And I guess finally, in terms of outreach and appointment, I'm going to be busy this semester. I may come to regret taking on what is effectively 3 additional classes to the responsibilities that I have in Brooklyn. But I am effectively in New York Monday and Wednesday, which means that I'm here in lovely New Jersey working with you Tuesdays and Thursdays. Now, Fridays I usually try to, make for myself. That's, my daily chores, my laundry. I need a day off. 3-day weekends I think everybody should have. But, if any of you need to reach out to me, you have any questions about the readings, about the assignments, about the class, there's a particular topic that you would like to examine, you can reach out to me really in 2 ways. My Skype address is michael.rossi1977, and we can also, if you don't have or prefer Skype, shoot me an email, and we'll set up a time where we can make a small individual Zoom meeting or have group Zoom chats. I say this every time I talk about it. About a year ago, I if I had known where we were going to go a year ago, I would have purchased, at least 100 shares of Zoom stock, and I'd be living good right about now. But be that as it may, all right. The best way to reach out to me is through my email and that's ROSSIM at rowan.edu. You can also reach me at my LIU address. They're both on the syllabus. That is michael.rossi at liu.edu. If you don't hear from me in 24 hours, just email me again. I might just get overwhelmed with the amount of work that I have to do this semester. And there are times where I'm looking at an email, but I'm not able to write back. I look at it on my phone, and then I'll tell myself, I got to write back to this person. And you all know it gets lost in the inbox. So if you don't hear from me and you need something from me, you have my permission now to be persistent. All right? I will get back to you if I miss you. Please don't think that I'm ignoring you. Just you need to remind me once again. And I think that is kind of the long and short of the basics of class here. You'll find that this online class is pretty straightforward. If you are looking at the Canvas page right now, you know that the readings are they're there. They're, the assignments are there. The discussion questions will appear, as we progress. So what exactly did you sign up for, right? What exactly is the study of comparative politics? And one of the ways that I like to begin this class is that I introduce comparative politics as both a methodology and a subfield of political science. Right. So within the study of political science, right, we have American government, we have international relations, we have law and justice, we have political theory, and we have comparative politics. Comparative politics is traditionally simply the study of comparative political systems. And there's a lot of overlap between comparative and international relations, what we all just kind of euphemistically call IR. The difference between comparative and IR is that IR tends to focus more on diplomacy, international engagement, causes of war, conflict resolution, things that take place at the international level. But there is an international component to comparative politics when we are looking at the formation, the function, and the process of a number of government systems around the world. In fact, one weird thing about political science is that we have this subfield called American government, and then the rest is comparative politics. I mean, there really is no difference between American government and comparative, except that comparative is just everything else. But, the thing to understand also, as I had mentioned, is that comparative politics is a methodology. So even if you're not studying governmental systems, right, even if you're not engaging in, let's say, comparative historical analysis of democracy or labor movements or authoritarian regimes, comparative politics as a methodology is something that employs what's known as the comparative method, right? The comparative method, right? We look at something, we identify its attributes, we look at least one other thing, and we look at its attributes, and we're able to draw observable data from what these two things offer, right? And from there, we might be able to draw some hypotheses about why one looks better or works better or functions better than the other, or why one is the way that it is and the other one isn't. So the comparative method, it's pretty simple in the way that we are able to extract data, inferential data, simply by looking at two or more things, right? In comparative politics, depending upon whether we're looking at quantitative or qualitative, can provide us either with dozens of case studies or, 3 to 5, 6 at the absolute most. So if you look at your syllabus, right, and you note that we have, 3 countries in each section, the democracies and the non-democracies, one of the goals is by the time we reach your midterm and final, you're able to understand why democracies work the way that they do in looking at least 3 countries, and why non-democracy or why non-democratic systems continue to proliferate in other parts of the world. So comparative politics can be any study in political science. It doesn't necessarily have to be, the government formation. Comparative politics can be, comparing cultures. It can be comparing electoral systems. It can be comparing political parties or political ideologies. We will even be engaging in comparative politics within democracies and non-democracies, right? So a little spoiler alert, right? Some countries are just more democratic than others, and some countries are more authoritarian than others, right? Why is that so? The comparative method allows us to at least have some kind of hypothetical approach, right? So I've already mentioned, a number of these examples here, right? We can study anything: the positions of political parties, the positions of electoral candidates. Just looking within the United States over the past, what seems like 20 years, and it really is only 2, right? We can kind of look at the degree of elitism within the Democratic and the Republican parties. And, with some argument, one way or the other, I can actually tell you that the Republican Party acts far more democratically than the Democratic Party. But at the same time, the Republican Party is much more authoritarian in its approach than the Democratic Party. And then when we look at the Republican Party versus other conservative right-wing parties around the world, we're able to note that the Republican Party, and I'm sorry to say this, is probably the most conservative, the most right-wing, and the most illiberal of many pronounced right-wing conservative parties, especially within the developed democratic world. As we're going to get to in a couple of weeks, there are, a number of right-wing national populist parties in Europe that may be anti-immigrant, they might be xenophobic, they might be anti-global, they might embrace some kind of homogeneous cultural nativism, but they're also big proponents of the social welfare system, Right? They are absolute proponents of guaranteeing both maternal and paternal leave. They speak out in favor of the working class, of unions, and they are staunch defenders of universal health. None of these things are even remotely considered within the U.S. Republican Party. So just this exercise alone, right, we are engaging in what is known as the comparative method. You take this a bit further, and we're able to look at, let's say, the degrees of freedom and democracy in the world. And, within some of my upper level classes, I like to ask my students, especially those that have been abroad for, a couple of weeks, maybe a month, maybe you lived abroad, maybe you're from overseas. If you've spent time in other countries, and it doesn't necessarily have to be one of those charming European countries. It can be a number of other, it can be countries in Latin America, it could be countries in the Middle East, could be countries even in Africa as well. And, does it seem to you that some countries just work better? Does it seem to you that just some countries have a greater sense of social capital, of social welfare than the United States? And if the answer is yes, right, then the question is, well, what makes it that way? What makes Canada more social democratic than the United States? What makes Austria or Iceland or Norway more democratic? What gives them, let's say, more freedom? However you want to put it, right? And at the same time, we can say the same thing about authoritarian systems, right? Is there a country in the world today that, if you were to think of the most authoritarian, like the most dictatorial, right? The one that just is the closest to the Orwellian, Big Brother state. This is where I would ask the class, and there's always one person going to raise their hand and go North Korea. And of course, as long as North Korea exists, that answer will always get you the correct answer. But beyond North Korea, there's Turkmenistan, Saudi Arabia, and these are some real authoritarian states. Then we have unbelievably impoverished countries that, don't necessarily threaten you with life and limb with the security police, but just simply the absence of the state, the absence of law, the absence of infrastructure, like the Central African Republic, or Niger, or Chad, or Haiti, or Somalia, for that reason. Then we can look at a country like Cuba or China and say, yes, they are authoritarian, but if you had to choose to live in, you could choose, okay, you could live in Cuba or you could live in Saudi Arabia. Which one would you live in? And I'm going to go out on a limb here and assume that most of you would say, I'll take Cuba. I'll take Cuba over Saudi Arabia, right? Well, what makes Cuba a little bit less authoritarian than Saudi Arabia? So this is where the comparative method comes in. It's a class that introduces you to comparative international systems, but there's a lot that we are going to be looking at even within the readings, between the lessons, right? And I guarantee you that by the time you get to the midterm, you're going to start thinking critically on your own. There's a lot of these questions, a lot of these ideas, a lot of these theories that I'm going to be, introducing to you, that you're going to start looking at a number of cases and areas that you know well. And I think that this is going to make the class really, really enjoyable. And speaking, right, of theoretical approaches, okay, we can look at theoretical findings within political science and provide a real critical analysis of it. One of the first big readings that you've got is Comparative Politics and the Comparative Method by Howard Wiarda. Not the easiest read, and I'll tell you right up front, this is something that grad students read, but I decided over the years I'm going to introduce this to undergrads, and I'm going to see what they can do with it. And up to this point, my undergrads have not failed me in understanding and taking this to heart, right, after reading and attending the lectures. So let's see what you guys can do. But there's a lot of theories within political science and within academia altogether that, unfortunately don't really explain really how the world works. But scholars and practitioners, they love to stick to their theories. more than looking at reality. And so is another thing that I want to sort of point at in this class is that we are going to base a lot of our initial premises within theory, but reality oftentimes pushes some of that stuff aside. And theory can't predict people like Donald Trump. And theory would never be able to assume that Joe Biden would be almost physically carried, into the White House by the Democratic Party. So with all of this said, and I hope that I haven't turned you off to the material. This might be a little daunting here, right? Comparative politics is largely based around three axioms. Right? Three big areas of inquiry. And the question is, where do we begin? Right? We can look at a country or a region or a city or a community, whatever it is that you want to look at. And we can approach it from three possible starting points. We can start with political culture, right? PC, political culture. We can maybe think about political institutions. Or, if you're the Marxist in the room, political economy. The question that I usually ask students on the first day is, you want to understand why people do the things that they do. Why do people defend the things that they defend, vote for the things that they vote for, uphold the things that they uphold, and fight for the things that they fight for, right? And you can look in the United States and say, in light of the, assault on Washington a couple of days ago, right? You got to tell yourself, not all of those Trump supporters were crazies. Right? I think some of them truly believed that they were doing the right thing. Why do they believe the things that they believe? Why, after all of this, they still feel that the election was rigged? Why do they, and why will they, continue to support Donald Trump? Why were there people, and why are there people, that honestly believe that Joe Biden is going to make things perfect? Why has there been an explosion of support for left-wing progressives like Bernie Sanders or AOC or Ilhan Omar or Nina Turner or Jamal Brown? Right? Why do people feel the way that they do? Well, if we begin with political culture, right? We begin with the history, we begin with traditions, identities. This isn't even political science. This is more like history and anthropology and sociology. But it's the stuff that makes us who we are. You all have beliefs. Some of you may have absolutely no interest in politics whatsoever. And that's fine, because if I was to ask you why, you could probably give me a very cogent reason. And then there are others, looked at your stats, some of you are, or many of you are poli-sci majors, you might be completely devoted to one point or another. Right? And I'm not going to discriminate, right? I'm not going to discriminate, but the culture kind of explains some kind of pre-existing behaviors, attitudes, and values. And that's usually where a lot of students like to think, this is a great place to start. But here's the thing. Do cultural values, traditions, identities, habits, whatever, do they just form out of nowhere? Or are they products of the resources that we have or don't have and the institutions that we are exposed to? When we think of political institutions, we oftentimes just only think of political parties. And sure, some people swear by the Democratic Party, others by the Republicans. And, if you're a card-carrying member of one party or the other, or you can look at any other country for that matter, the party is going to certainly solidify your beliefs and your values, and your beliefs and values are going to continue to bring you back to that party, right? One way or the other. There was a book published, I think it was '04 or '05 by Thomas Frank called What's the Matter with Kansas? And the premise of the book, it was trying to figure out why it was that a bunch of lower-class, poor, blue-collar, white workers from Kansas voted for George W. Bush. Why they voted for the Republican Party over John Kerry, the Democratic Party, when the Democratic Party is, or at least was, more sensitive and more favorable to working-class beliefs and values, when the Republican Party effectively became the party of Wall Street, the party of millionaires. And one thing that many people had failed to understand is that the voters decided that they were going to place their importance not in socioeconomic, but sociocultural. Many white working class rural dwellers are socially conservative. They believe in, what I call the 3 Fs: faith, family, and fatherland. Right? They believe in traditional values. They're against abortion. They're not out there, basically saying transgender identities are the way to go. And that's not to say that John Kerry at the time was big on any of this stuff. But George W. Bush came down pretty hard and said, nope, marriage is between a man and a woman, and abortion should be illegal. And even though his economic policies would have disenfranchised a whole bunch of rural America, they decided to vote for him because of the cultural reasons, right? And the Republican Party decides that they're going to capitalize on that by not just being the party of Wall Street oligarchs, but also characterizing and selling themselves as the party of small-town rural America that speaks on behalf of traditional Norman Rockwellian American values against the threats of secular progressivism, liberalism, and all sorts of horrible maladies that come out of New York and San Francisco or whatever it is, right? So institutions can certainly shape the way that people think, even beyond political parties. What about, the schools that you go to? What about the shows that you watch growing up? We're all children that grew up on Sesame Street and Mr. Rogers. I mean, at least I know that, right? And the shows that teach us as kids how to share, how to cooperate, how to recycle, how to count to 20 in Spanish, whatever, right? These things create, innate behaviors and values in us before we turn the age of 5, right? And what about, our form of schooling? What about the areas in which we live in, right? These institutions also can be affluent, they can be poor, they can be communitarian, they can be completely dysfunctional, right? This brings in political economy. If you're born into a family where money is no problem and you can get the best education, go on the best vacations, eat the best food, do this, do that, right? That's not to say that you're going to be a philanthropist. It's not going to say that you're going to be, you're going to love humanity. You can be unbelievably selfish and entitled, and that creates a certain set of values. Likewise, you could come from a poor family, or you could come from a neglected neighborhood. And, again, that's not going to make you, a fighter for justice. It could turn you off to the world. You could be unbelievably cynical. You could believe that the people that ask for your votes only want just that. They don't care about you. They don't care about your well-being. They'll BS you. They'll make you think that that they like you. You vote for them, and that's that. So you grow up to distrust people. You grow up to distrust the police. We're living in, a Black Lives Matter era now where, the facts are fundamentally clear. There is overwhelming evidence that law enforcement will treat whites very differently from blacks or just simply people of color. And it was on display a couple of days ago when, even CNN I was watching couldn't, keep it back and say the reason why these protesters or rioters, whatever you want to call it, are getting away with it is because they're white. If this was, black Antifa, if this was, black Muslim, Latino progressives and union leaders marching on Washington, the security detail would have opened fire. This would have been seen as a terrorist attack. And yes, the media is telling us that this was, domestic terrorism, but the fact that there were very few lives lost, and the fact that you will have, unfortunately, white people that will go in and shoot up a church or shoot up a movie theater and still be escorted out by the cops, whereas, unfortunately, a black person, doesn't even have a gun. The cop thinks that he does, shoots him dead, and then suddenly gets off on a technicality. That is going to create, either the institutions or the economy, the resources that one have different positions, right? So why do people do the things that they do? Why do they believe the things that they believe? It's tempting to begin with political culture, and I, for one, have no problem with that. But we need to understand that political culture is influenced by political economy, and political institutions. And we can even begin with economy and say that, economics or the resources that we have or lack thereof are either going to create certain dispositions or lead us into certain political parties, right? So if I was born with, all the money that I could spare, I probably wouldn't be a democratic socialist. Okay? If I had everything going my way, sure, I'd be a big proponent of the status quo right now, but I don't. And as a result, right, I tend to favor more alternative forms of politics, which is something that is much more available in parliamentary democracies, not just in Europe, but in Canada, the Middle East, and Latin America. So as you can see, for an introductory class, we are going to be exploring a number of things, which by the end of the semester, I think you're going to be in great shape to take a number of upper-level courses within political science and economics. So with all of that said, what will we be examining? Well, first and foremost, right, this is, traditionally designed around an examination of international political systems. As I mentioned, we'll be looking at 3 countries that are democracies, 3 countries that are non-democracies, along with theoretical approaches to understanding both. Within the first section, we will note very early on that not every democracy is the same. Some countries are more democratic than others. However, that does not necessarily mean that the country that is comparatively less democratic simply needs to take the country that is more democratic's constitution and adopt it for itself. Right? So if you were to think to yourself, maybe what we can do to make the United States better is to take, the Swiss Constitution and make it ours. I don't think so. You adopt the Swiss Constitution, this country's going to fall apart very, very, very fast. And we'll get to that when we get to that. But yes, we will be asking why some countries are more democratic than others. We're also going to be looking, and this is where I feel the class gets more interesting. The democracies are the little goody two-shoes countries. It's the non-democracies that make this class interesting. We're not only going to be looking at the function of what I just simply call illiberal political regimes, but we're going to be looking at why they persist. And I have to say, more recently, why they're growing. There are a number of countries in the world today. There is at least 50 countries, if not more, that are non-democratic or very, very weak democratic, and why they persist, and why some of them are pretty powerful and fairly entrenched. In order to answer, or at least hypothesize, all of these questions, we need to look at, as I just showed you before with the diagram, the relationship between cultural attitudes, political behavior, and economic development. So a good, well-rounded examination of a quality of democracy necessitates us to look at culture, political behavior, and economics. We cannot do this just by using one axiom. All right, then, so what countries will we examine? Well, if you look at the syllabus, the answer is, pretty apparent. But I want to explain a little bit why, and I want to justify the reasons why I've chosen the countries and why I really haven't changed the countries around over the years. I've largely stuck with these 6, and there's reasons for that. First and foremost, we begin with Great Britain, the United Kingdom, however you want to call it. Now, Great Britain is almost always used as the first case study. Even though Great Britain today is not really a major world player like it was 100 or so years ago, but we begin with Great Britain largely because it's the foundation of modern parliamentary democracies. Right? And I know that there are people that will argue that, democracy begins in classical Greece. That might be true, but classical Greece had about 15 to 1700 years in between democratic city-states and the modern Greek state. So, not much that we can really do there. And some people will say that, the United States is the oldest democracy. That's nice. I mean, we're up there, but, a lot of our ideas come from come from Great Britain. So Great Britain is what I like to call, the Atari of democracies, the original, and one that might be outdated, one that might be really more of an interest to, fans of nostalgia and 40 and 50 somethings, but it's a country that gradually developed the parliamentary structures of democracy and laid the foundations for what many, many states today model themselves on. More appropriately, our second case study, Germany, is probably a better example of a functioning, contemporary, flexible, organic democracy. And even though Germany is not the most democratic country on the planet, it's a great example of a country that, unlike the United Kingdom, reached democratic potential after a series of fits and bouts and a world war or two. So Germany is a country that has gone through enormous political extremities to the point where it is still considered today to be one of the best functioning democracies, but a democracy that is built on its earlier failings and shortcomings. Right? So whereas Great Britain just kind of gradually developed and for the most part just continues to operate like a unique steampunk Rolls-Royce or whatever it is, right? Germany has been made, remade, unmade, and remade again, which probably explains why its political systems are much different from that of its UK counterpart. Now, there's two countries that we've looked at in Europe. I always feel like we need a non-European example. And, sometimes these courses will look at Japan, or they'll do Mexico or Brazil. I like India. India for a number of examples. India is clearly a developing country. It has a colonial legacy. And when we get to India, the big question is, how the hell does this country remain democratic with all of its problems? Right? India is one of those anomalies that kind of flies in the face of many theoretical democratic indices. But its democratic character, which, yes, has a foundation from the British model, has been able to develop its own unique form of democracy, which I wouldn't necessarily say is something that should be sellable to the rest of the world, but it works as far as India is concerned. Then we take our midterm, and we come back and we look at non-democracies. Now, Venezuela is a country that I've always thought at some point I need to take out. Right? I always thought, all right, Venezuela, this is the last time I'm doing Venezuela. It's the last time I'm doing Venezuela. The thing about Venezuela is that it is in the news all the time because the United States loves to obsess over how rotten Venezuela is. I chose Venezuela for a couple of reasons. I choose to keep it for a couple of reasons. One, it's a Latin American component, and that kind of, I want to be a little global here. So Venezuela, takes care of the Latin American section. Number two, like India, it has a colonial legacy, but unlike India, Venezuela's early political system was based more on international economic engagement, whereas India was kind of closed off for about 30, 40 or so years. The real reason why Venezuela is now included in the non-democracies is mostly from 1998 onward. With the political, upheaval that brought Hugo Chavez to power, and now his, successor, his, highly unsuccessful successor, Nicolas Maduro. I was about to take Venezuela out until the Trump-supported aborted coup a couple of years ago when the United States tried to overthrow the Maduro government, and it just ended in failure. Now, Biden's going to be president in a couple of days. I have no idea where we're going to go foreign policy-wise, but I can tell you this much. A Biden presidency is going to be much more aggressive and certainly no stranger to supporting CIA coups here. So Venezuela is, on America's radar, and that's not to mean that we're going to invade it. But the reason why Venezuela is what it is today has a lot to do with American foreign policy, unfortunately, and the idea that its primary source of income is a raw material that is exported. So Venezuela, as a rentier state, is a really good example of an illiberal hybrid regime that survives on the generated revenue from one raw material. Then we got to do Russia. There's no way we are going to not do Russia in this class, right? Russia is big. Russia is pervasive. There's absolutely nothing subtle about Russia. And as long as Vladimir Putin remains in charge, it is his country. Russia is far more authoritarian than Venezuela, but it still has some rudimentary trappings of democracy. And while American media loves to portray Putin as this autocratic tyrant, reminiscent of the czars from years ago, the Russian political system is extraordinarily volatile. Public opinion, I think, genuinely believes in Putin. He's got approval ratings that oftentimes average in the upper 60s to mid 70s. I mean, this is something that elected officials would only dream of having. The opposition in Russia is largely non-existent, and if you see any one of them, you really don't want them anywhere close to nuclear launch codes. So Russia's an interesting example of also a hybrid regime, but is increasingly authoritarian. And then finally, we look at a real authoritarian state, China. I mean, there's no real democracy, there's no open elections, but of the three, China is probably the most unified, the strongest economically, and in the last couple of years is now governed by somebody that is easily even more powerful and globally influential than Vladimir Putin. I'm talking about Xi Jinping. China is an up-and-coming global power and is slated to bypass the United States as an economic giant anywhere from the next 5 to 10 years. So when we look at the non-democracies, Russia and China, for an introductory class, just seems pretty obvious, and I don't think anybody would object to having them in. Now, there could have been a whole bunch of other countries, and I will try to mention them here and there for a larger comparison's sake. As I had mentioned, sometimes we do Japan in the section on democracies. And the reason why I don't do Japan now, or I haven't done Japan really in a long, long, long time, is because its development and its modernity very closely resembles that of Germany. So, at the risk of saying, well, Japan is basically Germany of East Asia, there's not much that we can get out of Japan that we didn't already get out of Germany. If this were a year-long class and we had more time, yes, I would definitely include Japan, and probably by extension South Korea. In fact, I would even now think of putting South Korea in more than Japan. Japan was a big country in the early 2000s. It's now 2021. If we're to look at a democracy in East Asia right now, I would say South Korea would be a little bit better. As far as non-democracies, Iran is another country that I would have done in lieu of Venezuela. Iran's neat in the sense that, like Russia and Venezuela, it's regarded in the American media as dictatorial, tyrannical, a horrible, brutalistic, terrorist-ridden regime. And yet Iran is, in my opinion, the rising power in the Middle East. Right? If we're looking for a regional power, not a hegemon, but a regional power within the Middle East, Iran has been slowly and steadily growing since the Second Gulf War of 03 to 05. And without Iraq as a counterbalance to Iran's military, diplomatic, and now nuclear arsenal, there really isn't any one country that can counter Iran. Now, you might think to yourself, Israel could do this. Israel's in a very weird position because Israel does have allies in the Middle East, but only because they are jointly fearful of Iran. So like Israel and Saudi Arabia hate each other's guts on any other situation, but they'll work together foreign policy-wise to counterbalance Iran. And speaking of Saudi Arabia, I wouldn't put my money on that. It is a country that has been propped up and supported, first by the United Kingdom and then the United States. Iran has been around for 3,500 years. Right? They're there. They are the rising power. And in many respects, they wield considerable influence over Iraqi, Syrian, and increasingly Lebanese politics, but definitely Iraqi and Syrian, right? Again, if there was more time, I would definitely include Iran. I actually did Iraq way in the beginning when I was teaching this class, but Iraq is now kind of, well, it's not the hot mess that it was 10 years ago, but Iraq has kind of fallen off the radar. Iraq is just this small, weak, corrupt, internally divided state, which I used to teach when Saddam Hussein was in power. It kind of shows you how long I've been doing this. But yes, Iraq would have been an interesting country, to also include as a Middle Eastern component. Brazil. One day I might figure out what to do with Brazil, but I don't know where to put Brazil. I don't know whether to put Brazil in the democratic camp, in a very, very weak democracy, or in the authoritarian camp, considering that Jair Bolsonaro is, in my opinion, one of the most dangerous people on the planet. Not Xi Jinping, not Kim Jong-un, not Vladimir Putin, not Donald Trump, none of them. In my opinion, one of the most dangerous people on the planet today is Jair Bolsonaro, simply because of his desire to turn the Amazon rainforest into a country club and destroy the global environmental, climate structure that we have. Bolsonaro is a loose cannon. He is unbelievably unpredictable. And, if I can just soapbox here for just one moment, the sooner that he is removed from power, the better that the better green politics, the better the world's health will be. The man is just absolutely unhinged. So right now I would probably put Brazil in the non-democratic camp, but pretty soon we're all going to have nothing but non-democracies to talk about. The same thing could be said about Nigeria, right? Nigeria could be the African case study, which looks at Nigeria a lot like India, right? Nigeria's got a lot of resources. It's got a lot of potential. But whereas India just barely hobbles on as a functioning democracy, Nigeria is almost tantamount to rampant corruption, complete and utter elite-driven oligarchy, right? You've all been, you've all gotten an email from some Nigerian prince at one point, right? Trying to tell you that he's trying to give you some money or whatever it is, right? So we could have used Nigeria. Switzerland, if this class was to be a graduate seminar, I would have to include Switzerland, just because Switzerland is like one of those uber democracies, right? It's so unbelievably democratic that there's not even really a functioning central government, right? Most of the democratic decision making takes place at the local canton level. But what's interesting about Switzerland, and I am going to bring this up when we get into our section on populism, is that it's a functioning democracy. There's no question about it. But the country is very parochial, very conservative, and very closed off to the outside world, right? And there's this understanding among the Swiss that their democracy and their system works great when we don't allow anyone else in to potentially screw it up. So, the more democratic your country is doesn't necessarily make you all-inclusive, doesn't make you all-inviting to everyone. Sometimes you need to keep that gated community alive in order to make the current paying members happy and prosperous. Okay? What countries will probably come up in discussion? Well, you can bet that we're going to talk about Syria, especially when we look at Russian foreign policy. Egypt, certainly when we examine hybrid regimes. North Korea, because I can't not talk about North Korea. And when we look at theories of authoritarianism, it's certainly going to be there. Ukraine, again, with Russia, but also with our discussion of hybrid regimes. Spain, right? You think Spain? Really? Spain is a great example of a country that transitioned to democracy through some kind of negotiated settlement with all of its political factions. This is something that's really going to come in more towards the end of class. But Spain has really kind of set the standard for the elite bargaining model, right? The idea of negotiated transitions to democracy. And Norway, just because if we were to talk about like a super unbelievably hip first world country that has more, that just doesn't know what to do with all the money that it makes and all the social welfare that it has, I mean, Norway's biggest problem today, if you really want to be honest here, Norway's biggest problem is that they are literally running out of garbage to recycle for renewable energy. Now, if that's your biggest problem, dude, you solved a lot of other things in life, okay? Our biggest problem right now in the United States is whether or not a functioning political party should be disbanded for engaging in authoritarian practices. Norway's biggest thing is that they're running out of garbage. They're even importing garbage, and they're running out of garbage to recycle. Now, if that's your problem, you know what? We know what your second biggest problem in Norway is. Half the country lives above the Arctic Circle, so it gets dark really quickly. So people get depressed. So it's up to local towns to decide, are they going to keep the Christmas lights on until April to make people feel happy. If that's your biggest problem, along with we're running out of garbage to recycle, dude, you are the first world of first world countries. And finally, the United States. I mean, it's the country that we all know, and you probably know best, and it is definitely something that I'm pretty certain many of you will bring up in discussions, either in our threaded chats or in our Zoom classes. So, with that said, we have a lot to do over the next 14 and 15 weeks. So within that, right, we're going to be looking at theoretical approaches to democracy versus applied. I mentioned beforehand, I like to introduce students within this class to some kind of existing theories within the discipline, right? You need to kind of know what some of the long-standing literature is, some of the real heavy-hitting scholars. And even though some of these theories might be outdated and, not altogether non-problematic, we need to understand, right, what the discipline talks about. But then we need to also take a step away from the theory. Right? This isn't grad school. This is undergrad. So, you can kind of read, Seymour Martin Lipset, or you can read Howard Wearda, or Aaron Leipart, or Juan Linz and Alfred Stepan, or Alexis de Tocqueville. And it's all fine and good, but then you kind of look at how the world works, and it's not as neat and organized as that is. So, applied democracy is also something that, especially when we look at India and Russia and Venezuela, should not be ignored. We will look at the role of civic institutions, the role of the public, the importance of not just an informed citizenry, but an empowered citizenry. An empowered citizenry that isn't necessarily conducive towards democracy, but sometimes engages in traditional forms of authority. So civil society, while a lot of people in poli-sci say, if you see civil society, it's got to be democratic, I say nay, nay. Right? You can kind of look at the Trump rallies in the United States. That is civil society. That is active and empowered citizens. But what they want and what they are pushing for is not the most social democratic. But I'm not saying throw that out, and I'm not saying disregard them. Far from it. We have disregarded people and groups like that for far too long. And that's one of the reasons why we're scratching our heads wondering, why doesn't this country get any better? Well, this is a thing that we have to look at, right? We're going to be looking at civil society. We need to look at which ones embrace civic co-fraternity and which ones advocate exclusionary communitarianism. What I also do in this class is, you should know about this, right? I am a political scientist by trade. I got my PhD in 2009. But I'm really, I like to say, an historian masquerading as a political scientist. Now, I'm a big fan of the belief that if you're going to do good poli-sci, you have to know history. You have to do some form of anthropology. You got to, play around in the other social science disciplines. If all you do is just read the New York Times and listen to the State Department and take them at their word, you're going to constantly be coming up with limited predictions and, in my opinion, very, very biased understandings of how the world works. So while I'm not a fan of path-dependent historical legacies, because oftentimes these things can lead you astray, I do feel that comparative historical analysis and process tracing is very important to help us understand why these countries are the way that they are. So within the individual lectures, there will be historical background. There's going to be things that lead up to the formation of these modern governmental systems, and that might help us understand why these countries, do the things that they do. All right, as we move, towards the end here, this is only the introduction, okay? My teaching style is, well, basically what you see and hear here. The way that I'm teaching right now, the way that I'm speaking is how I would normally talk in class. And, I would normally stop if people, have questions and, want to, mention something here or there. I'm able to kind of turn these video lectures kind of like into podcasts. So, you can always listen to them while you're doing other stuff, and they usually are about an hour, hour and a half, the absolute most. So, you can download them to your phone or whatever it is, put your earbuds in, do some jogging, do some laundry, do whatever it is, and you can listen to my, disembodied voice here. And you still have the opportunity of getting all your notes, right? All the PowerPoint lectures are here. You don't have to worry about writing everything down vociferously. You can stop and pause and write all this stuff, around here. But I've taught this class enough times to know the material front and back, up and down, left and right. Right? At the risk of bragging, I can teach this class in my sleep. And it's one of the reasons why I'm actually looking forward to teaching this class than some of the stuff that I'm doing in Brooklyn, because that's new stuff that I have to write. This Comparative Politics, it's an old friend. Right? It's an old friend. I know the material, and I'm pretty comfortable with it. So with that said, I try to give you what you paid for. I try to give you a well-rounded introduction to a whole bunch of things that you previously did not know that much of. I mean, I go on the idea that you do know that there is a country called Germany, right? You do know that there is a guy named Vladimir Putin, right? But in return, okay, I expect a couple of things from you. Number one, I expect you all to be in attendance when we are on Zoom call. I expect you to have your cameras on. And if you're one of those people that doesn't turn the camera on or turns it on and then 5 minutes later turns it off, if there's a reason, let me know. Okay? Just let me know. But I would like to have the cameras on. When we have Zoom, I will expect that you will have listened to at least half of the lecture for that week. So I will run our class, as I said, more on a seminar format than a lecture. I'm not going to repeat what I've already recorded, but I will begin with maybe us looking at the study questions and seeing what you can get out of it. You can begin by bringing up questions of your own, because I'm pretty certain that you are going to ask something that a classmate of yours has the same thing. Now, as far as classroom etiquette, now, when we were, in a classroom setting, I would say, no texting, no cell phones, no this, no that. I mean, we're now on complete, digital stuff here. But classroom etiquette, that's part of the whole Zoom thing. Please be on time. Please have your cameras on. Make certain that if there's noise in the background that you mute it, so I don't have to figure out who you are and where it comes from and mute you yourself. When it comes to political arguments, hey, this is a poli-sci class. At some point, someone's going to say something that's going to rile you up. That's the nature of poli-sci. Keep it clean, keep it civil, right? Keep it within the realm of decorum, right? You're all adults, but at the same time, if I need to step in and be the moderator, right, I may have to, but this rarely ever happens. So I'm thinking that most of this is just boilerplate material that I've been using, sort of year in and year out. All right, so why should you take this class? First of all, I'm flattered that there are so many people who have signed up for not only an online class, but an online class taught by somebody that most of you don't even know. Unless you read my Rate My Professor or you've seen me already on YouTube, which by that way, thank you very much. I always say take an introductory class because it serves as building blocks for higher levels. Now, if you're a senior and you're already graduating, great, wonderful. have fun. If you're a sophomore, even a freshman, okay, this is a fantastic opportunity for you to enter within, I think, a really, really awesome subfield of poli-sci. So, as I said, I don't expect you to know a lot. I just expect that you know that these countries exist. So the lectures that I'm going to be offering will be really, provided to you by what I call the banking method. It's a lot of material. And the lectures are going to draw from the readings, but not just the readings. Right? There's going to be stuff that I will include beyond that. And you're going to find, definitely by the time we get to the case studies, Britain, Germany, India, whatever, that, those chapters in the textbook, they're dense. They're huge. We're not going to cover everything. Okay? I take the important stuff, I add some other stuff, and that is what provides you with the material that, yes, there's always going to be one to say, is this going to be on the test? That stuff will be on the test. But even there, look, this class is essential for helping you understand how the world operates beyond, a few catchphrases thrown out by politicians and media pundits, right? You hear about Russia, you think, oh, Russia rigged the election. No, they didn't rig the election. You think, oh, Russia's undermining our political culture. No, trust me. I've gone through the political spectrum over my life. I went from hardcore right-wing to Bernie Sanders socialist, and I've everything in between. I didn't spend that long on the Clintons. I can tell you this much. American political culture is very good and incredibly capable of undermining its own integrity. You don't need Russia. But Russia is important. China is important. I want to help you to understand how important it is beyond the New York Times op-ed pages. But look, there is a challenge of a 100-level class because oftentimes 100-level classes can be the most difficult because you go in as, in the role-playing world, you go in as a noob. You're a level 1. You just created a character, right? And you don't have that much experience. You just have the opportunity. If you're World of Warcraft, Skyrim, whatever it is, you're walking around the town. You got crappy armor. You got maybe like a stick or whatever it is, right? And all you can do is kill bats and boars for low experience points. And you got to work your way up to, I don't know, maybe a level 10 veteran or whatever it is, right? This class does that. This class gives you the experience. This class will take noobs and turn you into veterans. It will give you the building blocks that you need for the upper level courses. And while right now, this is the only class that I'm teaching at Rowan, right? Over the years, and I've taught dozens of classes at at Rutgers and TCNJ and now LIU, right? You take this class with me, then you take upper level classes, and you'll find that there's a lot of overlap, right? So, hey, if you find this stuff interesting and you want to do more stuff, you as students are perfectly fine in talking to the higher-ups and saying, hey, we want this guy to do more online classes. Not saying that's going to happen, but let's just see where we all go, and I sincerely hope that you find this stuff interesting. But I got to say, be forewarned, okay? I have little sympathy for slackers and other representatives of what I like to call apathetic mediocrity, okay? If you're falling behind, you need to tell me why. If you're just lazy and you don't want to do the work, well, take another class. But I have to emphasize, the best way for you to excel in this class is to come to Zoom meetings having done the reading and having listened to the lectures. Okay? If you come prepared, this class will be unbelievably easy. If you fall behind, I don't stop. We keep going, and there's a lot of material, okay? Now, I won't spoon feed you. I will help you think critically. Now, I said here I don't post my notes online. I mean, technically I am doing it now because of the nature of online learning. But this class is going to require you to put in full time. I'm not saying it's organic chemistry. I'm just simply saying that with the online lectures available for you to access, you're going to be doing a lot of stuff outside of the Tuesday, Thursday, 1 hour and 15. And while that might not necessarily be fair, I've also learned during the COVID period that lecturing on Zoom has its downside, especially when the internet conks out or voice lags or something else like that, right? I would rather I have have the lecture material out there. If you want, you can access it at 3 p.m., you can access it at 3 a.m., whenever you want, but please make certain that you have it all done. And with that, right, your first reading for next week kind of introduces us to, as I said, the subfield as well as the methodology. It is available on Canvas, Howard Wiarda's Comparative Politics, Past and Present. I will provide a full lecture with description, and I would like, if you can, read the article first, then listen to the lecture, then go back to see where the things that you couldn't understand now become clearer. Most students, they read this and are like, oh my God, I don't know what's going on. And that's fine. That is perfectly fine. But you'll find that the lectures that I offer help clarify and complement many of the things in the readings. Do the readings, listen to the lectures, you're going to be fine. And the better you do leading up to the midterm, I guarantee you the second half of class is going to be a cakewalk. It's going to be real, real, real easy. But you got to do the work, and I am more than happy to help work with you over the next 14 to 15 weeks. All right, so with that said, ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. I hope that I sold you on this class. I hope that you found this material to be interesting. And stay tuned, because I will provide you with the first full lecture of Wiarda as soon as I finish that recording. So enjoy the rest of the day, and I hope to see all of you very, very soon. Take care now.